I sit on the edge of the table and my legs are up on his shoulders as he eats me and tongue fucks my hungry pussy.
Hi, I'm Andy,
And I'm Roger,
and welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics.
on our search to find the middle.
We're going to give you last week's news today.
It's a slogan we should put on a t-shirt.
Stop touching her!
I am tonight announcing my candidacy.
Taylor Swift.
Look, my biggest issue with marriage is that I think that it's a fundamentally flawed institution that is built on the oppression of women.
I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny.
Having truly rational conversations about controversial issues is risky these days.
Roger,
Andy, how you doing?
I'm pretty good. Can I ask you, have you ever been to a book club?
No. I've known actually quite a few people who are into book clubs, and I've always felt a bit jealous because it felt like a bit of a, girls thing.
A girls thing. Okay, well, I think today is a very fitting episode. I am going to read an excerpt from a book that may or may not be read in one of the thousands of book clubs around Australia at the moment.
Mm.
And I'm keen to know what you think. So I'm going to read a passage. I have been married for 5 years and have yet to reach the age of 30. I love my husband with all my heart, and our sex life is good. Great, even. My husband's appendage is reasonably sized, and we do enjoy using toys together, all shapes, sizes, and vibration settings. But I have a desire to feel full. I fantasize about fisting, but I'm too embarrassed to ask my husband. As a woman, you grow up hearing about how a vagina is no use if it's baggy, or you can fit a baseball up there. But really, often I imagine what it would feel like. I watch porn alone and enjoy watching other people shoving large dildos or items inside their vaginas and wish I had the courage to do this too, or even talk about it to my husband. I grew up in a sex-positive household. Nothing was taboo, but now I'm almost 30 and I cannot seem to express my secret desires to my husband. It feels embarrassing and scary.
Well, Andy, I think this is definitely not Oprah's book club that you've stumbled upon. When you first pitched this idea to me,
Hey, it wasn't my idea.
It wasn't your idea? I thought, what have you got us into? We have put ourselves through some torturous books, for the good of our listeners on this podcast. But this one has to be unique. So it's your pick for Book Week. So do you want to tell everyone what actually the book is?
Okay. So this is a book called, is it Want? I think.
Yeah, just Want.
I've already forgotten the title. Want by Gillian Anderson. So it's actually an edited volume of letters that have been solicited by Gillian Anderson, who's put them all together and compiled a book. Now, I came across this book through a recommendation, or at least not a recommendation because I'm not probably the target audience, but it was talked about in a social setting. And I was a little bit curious, so I had a look, and oh my God, this unleashed a world that I didn't know exists. So I guess the premise of this book as an edited volume is, I think the request was something like she solicited, the stories, like the unfulfilled desires from women from all over the world, all different cultures.
It's like a Dear Penthouse situation.
Yeah, and put it together. And the elephant in the room for this is that for two blokes, this is a really bizarre read. This is not what. Yeah, I'm not sure whether to believe it actually. Like some of the stuff in there.
I must admit. So this is a throwback to, I think, what was the original book called in the 80s? It was like The Secret Garden or something like that, where it broke a lot of cultural taboos because it did the same thing, but back in the 80s or whatever, where it was a compilation of what was reported to be women's secret sex fantasies. And it was distributed out, it was the book that mum kept under the bed and didn't let you see. And it was like this first kind of view of how, female sexual liberation and breaking those myths around what women really want, right? Versus what they're told to want and what they have to act. So Gillian Anderson plays this role on the TV series Sex Education, where she is a sex positive therapist, right? And So this is kind of an extension of that role, really, in a lot of ways, right? She plays this really influential sex education teacher attached to this high school. It's pretty shocking. Like, I think when you read these fantasies in the harsh day of light, it's pretty shocking, and it does make you wonder, especially as a bloke. I'm pretty sure that if these are anonymous letters or entries that have been submitted, that absolutely you would have some men in here writing these stories. I just, like, there would have to be that, in my opinion. But I don't want to say it's all fake, because obviously that's not true. But I definitely think you would attract some men writing these stories, and to be honest, some of them sound like they have been. But I made the very terrible mistake of buying this book as an audiobook. So not only do I have to deal with this really thick fantasy content, but I have to like listen to someone say it to me. And they've gone to the effort. So Gillian Anderson actually introduces each chapter in a sexy kind of husky voice. But they've actually gone to the trouble to try to match the author's description, whether it's their ethnicity, age, to the vocal reader. So they've gone to great lengths to try to make it accurate. And it is a hard listen, I must admit. It's like drinking out of the fire hydrant. And, you know, as much as I did enjoy Andy reading me a woman's sexual fantasy, it totally ruined it. I think I actually almost might have preferred that you narrated the audiobook. But what I'm about to play you now is my pick for like what it's been like. All right, so let me play this to you right now. And for our listeners, please, if you have this on any kind of speaker system or anything like that, or there are kids around, or heaven forbid you're at work or on a train, just make sure that this is private. Okay.
Before you play it, like I don't actually know what you're about to play, but I just want to add that the whole book is as like we haven't just like that. Literally, that bit that I read was literally me opening the book to a random page and just reading through and saying, "Oh yeah, this seems okay," and then seeing the word fisting, like, and go, "Whoa, hang on," and then I turned a few other, hey, oh, this does not get this. Oh, what the. This is even worse. So, like, I want to underscore to our listeners that this is like page for page, quite extreme content, and I would probably say is more extreme than hardcore pornography. This is pushing the envelope, or I was going to say stretching the envelope, but that's probably the wrong analogy.
Just stop, Andy.
So, all right. Okay, play it up.
So this is kind of like a Matrix situation. You can't really be told about the Matrix. You need to actually see it for yourself. So you're about to hear it for yourself, okay? In all its glory. I've got 2 curated clips for you, but let's just see how we go with the first one.
I see his face in my mind and curl my toes. His husky voice in my head gives me shivers. I caress my body thinking of him, getting my boobs sucked by him, hickeys all over my body, pinning me to the wall with one leg wrapped around his waist as he finger fucks me with 2 fingers or 3 and kisses me wildly. Neck kisses from the back while he holds my boobs. I sit on the edge of the table and my legs are up on his shoulders as he eats me and tongue fucks my hungry pussy. I want to sit on his face and make him eat me. I have to touch that pussy as he pours honey in my belly and licks it off. It drips in my pussy and he sucks it away. Just imagining this. I orgasm more than twice and squirt. God knows what will happen if anybody actually does all this to me. Bengali Indian, Hindu, heterosexual, single, no children.
Okay.
That's amazing.
So hats off for effort to match, like, you know, the ethnicity of the author of this fantasy to the vocal actor. You know, lots of points for that. Roger definitely approves. It is like a rapid fire, like explicit, like the whole hungry pussy thing, like really got me over the edge.
It's hard for us to listen to that and not. I mean, in this setting,
it's hard for anyone to listen to that.
I don't think we're joking at it at the expense of the desire per se, but like just that it is so crude, you know. And I think we're kind of laughing at that, as, you know, almost. What I'm trying to ask,
one of those embarrassing laughs, because you either
kind of a little bit like that.
When people giggle when they say penis or vagina when you're in high school.
Balls. Do you think the voice, like the voice actor or whoever was recording it, like, do you think they just had this vibe of, no, this is really serious? We like, it would be, if you laughed at this, you're like, you're not
Yeah.
respecting and so it was like this. It would be a taboo to laugh.
No, I don't.
Or do you think they were like?
I don't think they would have got it in one take. Let's put it that way. And if they did, hats off to you.
But don't you think that like if you find this funny, you probably to begin with aren't the right person to be recording this? Like I'm just imagining like there has to be someone who actually really does take this seriously and to heart that they wouldn't.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I think that part of the exercise of this is that it breaks you out of that mold. You find it shocking that anyone would want this or they express themselves in this way. But I think once you listen to it long enough, maybe you might develop a respect for it, or maybe you might even find yourself. I'm sure a lot of women, maybe not a lot. Let's just say there would be a type of woman that would be very aroused by listening to that. So I think it's just all sorts, right? And I think that when you hear it read out loud, it really has a different impact than perhaps reading it for different people. And I found that, I found it having the headphones in and listening to these while you're out and about, it almost feels illicit, and it was a very, very strange feeling. But yeah, I mean, so that's the first clip, and I kind of want to put it out there because it was quite an extreme, rapid fire, very, in some ways, very, I think crude. You used the word. I would say like quite vulgar, and then it challenges your view of okay, how widespread is this, and how many of like how widespread is this kind of fantasy for the female population, right? Or even the male population, like carrying these inner fantasies and monologues and maybe repressing them due to shame. Like, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm still trying to understand what this actually is. Like, is this a demonstration of the different like corners of human sexuality?
It's sexual liberation.
Yeah, but like, is it that or is it pornographic? Like, is the intention of this to get someone turned on, or is it to?
No, I think
is
it's
it
to
a
reduce
statement?
shame and normalize it. That a lot of women feel like this, and reading kind of a collection of this from many women serves a purpose of normalizing it, taking away shame, and perhaps even awakening someone who never thought this a day in their life, but was like, oh man, I'm really like loving this.
Okay, so I think that is a significant part of the book, and I think that's actually was the intention from Gillian Anderson in terms of the project. But I guess my question is more to understand, like, is the appeal of this book in terms of being sold in bookstores all around the world, is it that like, hey, read this book, like this is great to masturbate to, or is it like no, read this in the same way as you'd read the Female Eunuch by Germaine Greer? Like, is it?
Oh no, I don't think it's.
Or is it both? It can be both.
I would think that it's not. If you're asking if this is literature for women to masturbate to or to feel turned on, I don't think so. I think it's more female empowerment, feminism, sexual liberation, and probably like this idea of supporting like the curiosity aspect. Like, I think these kind of books take hold because of the fact that they break taboos. It's like, oh, have you read this? It's like it's the conversation starter, it's a curiosity. Like, I think it's that rather than masturbation or something like that. Right? I don't think people are doing that. But I mean,
can I flip it? Do you think there's like a market for dudes who would buy this or listen to this and get turned on by it?
Yeah, I definitely think so. Look, I mean, like, erotica is a thing. It's a genre. It's been around for a long, long time. There were Frenchmen, back in Revolution times that were reading this kind of stuff, right, and getting their jollies, right. So this is not new, and I don't want to take away this fact that like there are people who are turned on by it. Every human is susceptible to some kind of erotic literature in some way, right? Like you might have a line where it triggers a bit of a disgust for you, or it goes too far out of your comfort zone. But I think every person is susceptible to that, right? Like, just in the same way that books were the were the height of entertainment and stimulus back in the day, and now it's, movies and VR, and it keeps on going. And we're just familiar in our generation with video pornography. But this was the pornography of the past. And before that, it was paintings and stills and cave paintings, whatever it was, right? I think erotica has been around since the dawn of time, is all I want to say.
All right. So, I think this is about, as you said, the, kind of breaking down barriers and taboos. So, sorry, what was your original question?
Well, my original question was, how widespread do you believe it is that women, or men, if you want to have a stab at it, carry around these detailed, crude, explicit fantasies?
So I can't believe, and this is why I think, your instinct and my instinct were kind of aligned in that we're thinking, oh, these have to be written by men, at least some not insignificant proportion of these. Now, and maybe in an underlying sense, these kind of notions of fantasy could be there, but I still think culture is so inhibiting that people wouldn't even think them.
You don't think it's an awakening thing there?
I just don't know along the evolutionary cycle how fisting becomes a sexual fantasy. I can't.
The question wasn't, Andy, that how many fantasies involve fisting. It was just,
No, but if you ask the question differently around, say, for example, do women have a sex drive that is not necessarily, kind of acceptable in the same way as it is for men? I think probably yes, especially when you're looking at cultures in India or other parts of the world, right, where there's more repression.
Hey man, they invented the Kama Sutra.
Oh, true. No, fair point. But there's a lot of this stuff is you don't speak about it, right? Do you know this is the opposite of the scientific method, right? Because the Enlightenment was all about, okay, the scientific method, here's a process for exploring different ideas, and then you learn the idea, and then you share it to everybody, and then you build on it, and you advance science. But in this space, it's the opposite's true. It's no, the only thing you'll ever figure out is what you would happen to experiment on your own in isolation, and you never talk about anything amazing you've discovered. Think of something like asphyxiation and how that can kind of interact with sexual pleasure, right?
Yeah.
How the fuck does anybody discover that?
The old choke and stroke.
Now, we've probably moved on where some of these things do get shared, and and there's this whole so we and certainly through pornography or whatever, but
well, there's a genuine sexual liberation, a liberation movement, right? That occurred in the West, right?
But how much of that was experimentation as opposed to it's okay to have sex before marriage or even multiple sexual partners, those kinds of questions? Because I think the vast majority of, I would say, the sexual revolution was more around those sorts of things, rather than I think still people have always been very private in terms of.
Well, there was kind of the hippie culture, the free love culture, right? That these things are cyclical, but I do think in general the arc of sexual progressiveness is still expanding out, right? I think it's much more acceptable. What was, say, a deep taboo kink maybe 15 years ago is now no longer. And it's permeated the culture, like you said. So even things when we talk about this, 50 Shades of Grey, it's not really taboo anymore. That brought BDSM and whips and spanking and all these kind of other things that were quite deep and relegated to subcultures into the mainstream. And I think that has happened for countless things. Now, there will be a correction, and maybe we might be on the verge of seeing that swing back the other way, as a lot of more conservative values and government figures start to appear around the world. But definitely, I think, at least for our lifetime growing up, it's been a steady progression for more kind of progressive and adventurous attitudes towards sex, right?
Well, we've talked before about OnlyFans, right? And how, in my view, what OnlyFans has done is it's almost, it's created acceptance of softcore or even hardcore pornography as a respectable thing to do. Even
in quotations.
No, but compared to what it was 20 years ago, this isn't
That's true.
you can almost do that and have a day job and be quite protected in that, like, as in if you copped any insults, like that would be on the other person, whereas there's no way 20 years ago you'd get the sack if you were found out to be doing that sort of stuff. And like even stuff like I've seen, I read something just before around, what's her name, Abby Chatfield, is it? She's on the whole like product placements sort of thing for like some sex toy website or something, and she's like talking about all this smut around her, her relationship, and and then she's trying to flog like a BDSM kit in the same article, but like it's very, I'm just thinking like this is like this, like she's a pretty mainstream sort of figure now in terms of like Australian, kind of culture, right? Like she's maybe not an A grade, but A list, but she's maybe B or C, and
that's what I mean. So I think that there is, so the two things can be true. I think that in our lifetime, attitudes towards sex and liberation, especially on the like female side, has been steadily growing in acceptance and being normalized. Like think of what Sex and the City did for vibrators and dildos, right? That ain't no thing. We've talked about that before, that there's a great acceptance, almost a sense of feminist pride to own some kind of sex toy as a woman. Not the same for men. Like if you own a vibrator or dildo as a woman, that's kind of totally okay, kosher. You could talk about that in polite society. You couldn't talk about that for a man to own a fleshlight. Like you'd be some kind of deviant pervert, right? Like you have a disembodied vagina that you have sex with. That's totally different from this disembodied penis that I have sex with. It's shame on you, you filthy man. Do you know what I mean? Like, so it's like these attitudes have changed. I'm not necessarily crying poor because, fleshlight's not on my Christmas list, even though I've been a very good boy.
Black Friday sales are coming up.
No. But I think this is a good thing, right? And I think that the overall, this book is a direct copy from the Secret Garden one in the 80s or whatever, where it did the same thing, where it challenged people reading this to say, hey, actually, like, women have a really rich inner fantasy, inner monologue for this kind of stuff. And it's been routinely suppressed and repressed and downplayed. And I guess that's the challenge, because I do feel like you, going back to my question, is this widespread? I don't like, like the women and whatever, or even, horrifically thinking about your mum, like there's no chance that you think that they have these kind of fantasies, right? But maybe that's the part that like you need to be challenged on. But again, reading it and listening to that passage, I just don't believe it. It's too smutty. It's too like a man's written it kind of thing. But yeah, I want to play you one more clip just to curate one more view, and I think it'll take us in a different direction, which is very interesting in terms of the narrative around relationships between men and women at the moment. So let me cue this up.
I am a firm feminist, and have been for the last decade. But when I masturbate, I dream of being held down, handled roughly, called disgusting names that would make the suffragettes faint. Cumhole, cockhole, used up cunt. I dream of being dominated, of being praised when I service my master properly, sucking his cock, as sluts like me should, of being taken at any point of the day or night with no regard for what I want, only to satisfy him. But it goes further than this. My deepest fantasy is to be impregnated, to be bred over and over, kept pregnant and used for nothing more than for a man's pleasure, and to reproduce. I fantasize about being milked in milking stalls, while faceless men come up behind me and fuck me while my tits are being pumped, breeding me and starting the cycle all over again. It's not something I would ever want in real life, and it goes against everything I believe in and stand for, but the fantasy is so hot. I come every time. White Welsh, Christian, between £15,000 and £29,000, bisexual/pansexual, married/in a civil partnership, no children.
Well, that was definitely written by Andrew Tate.
The milking store was particularly vivid. But in this book, there are like you said, this is not just picked out. There's actually quite a few fantasies where women are talking about being milked or feeding people, being consumed, being like this kind of like sexual mother archetype.
Didn't you, hang on. I think I've put two and two together. Didn't you mention a milking fantasy last week's episode?
Did I?
What was the analogy about the Matrix we were talking about?
Oh yeah, yes, the racehorse that breaks their leg and then they get jerked off as a second, putting out the stud.
It all makes sense.
Melbourne
now,
Cup. This is the only thing you can do. All right. Now, obviously, that was a bit of a hard lesson, and it got a little bit fantastical.
Can I ask you a first, primer question about that though? Do you think that was real? Do you think that legit is a fantasy, or do you think this is put your mind in the head of the person who wrote that? Do you think that it was written like that deliberately for effect, as in to push the envelope, or do you think that's actually a real fantasy? Because I can imagine someone who's trying to push the boundaries, almost like an activist sense, like the Overton window, all right, this is actually my fantasy, but I'm going to amplify it to, achieve my goal here, which is to get in Gillian Anderson's book. You know what I mean? I can't believe that is the fantasy, that is, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that when I see something like that has a very much is a very rich kind of mindscape. It's got, layers of illustrative description and they've made a kind of fantasy world, right? It does seem to me like they are trying to describe a scene in a play or something like that. So I do think it's been dressed up. And what would happen, I guess, this idea of it being anonymous and you're kind of projecting something out probably does encourage people to submit quite extreme things in the hope to get picked up, but also just as an exercise, it becomes almost like a school project, like a creative writing exercise. And I can see you getting taken away like that, but maybe some of that is the mechanisms behind how fantasies do work and do evolve. If you're going back to the question where you asked me, is this anyone's fantasy for real life, word for word? I think the answer to that question, knowing what I know about human behavior and pornography, is there is a lid for every pot out there, right? Now, there's how many billion people in the world? It might be this lid might fit 5 pots out of that, 8 billion or 9 billion, whatever it is we're up to right now. Do I believe one of those people wrote into Gillian Anderson? Probably not. The odds are stacked against it. Someone just made it up. But do I believe someone will get turned on from that fantasy and they could, feel in the mood from that? Yes, I do.
Okay, well let's take that more general point, right? Because if we forget the specific details of it and generalize it to a more generic concept of dominance, right? Of submitting and being dominated and being passive. I think that principle is probably true for many people, and both men and women probably as well, right?
Yeah.
So I guess I can kind of see that, but I don't know. I just sort of...
You stuck at whether it's real or not. Okay, let's I think if we take out the specific examples of being in some kind of milking glory hole situation, I do think that what you touched on, this idea, there's a whole chapter dedicated to these really taboo, dominance, rough, kind of almost bordering on domestic violence style fantasies and rape fantasies and things like that. And Gillian Anderson even introduces in the book herself that they had to take some out because they contained criminal descriptions of criminal activities and further harm and things like that. So that's not even talking about the really extreme end, that there are people that probably where does it get too much, I guess, I'm sure that there are people that submitted things actually hurting themselves or killing, all these kind of things, right? Now, what it does say, though, is that what makes it really, really complicated, and I'm glad that it's in this idea of fantasies and where things are in the grey area, is that women and men, but this is from the women's side at the moment, do have fantasies, and there are erotic triggers and sexual triggers that blur the lines when it comes to violence against women or aggression towards women. And I think it goes to the idea of losing control. Right, it's the loss of control that triggers excitement. That's the whole thing with dominance, right? That you are not in control anymore. You submit. You're not responsible anymore. So it's these deep psychological things that happen. But this is also what makes the the conversation so hard in a modern setting that this is a part of the interaction between men and women, both ways. And so things are not always so clear. I mean, it leads me back to the whole Johnny Depp Amber Heard thing. That's like a really good example of that it was obviously part of their dynamic to have these kind of like things that border on domestic violence or play fighting between each other. Now, that can be dysfunctional. It can be just a pure fantasy. It can bleed over into the real world, but it's there. And that's the ugly truth behind it, right? That's the kind of the grey area that everyone kind of knows, but no one talks about.
I guess the other related thing about this is, just like, I don't know what the world's become now, like in the context of like Tinder and all those apps, but it was never really a viable strategy to be like not very confident. Like if you're trying to sort of, certainly as like a young male trying to attract, someone from the opposite sex, like you have to like assert your dominance. It's a turn off if you're not confident, like just generally. Like, so, it's like the whole classic trope of like, women like love bad guys. There was like, they never like, the good guy always comes last. It's the bad guys.
Yeah.
And that's a trope. But the thing about tropes is that they've got like kind of aspects of truth to them. So I think that's part of it. I want to take this in a slightly different direction now. I want you to play the role of like a high school debater, where you've got to pick. You get given a position, and you've got to argue for it, no matter what your personal position is or view is. And I'm going to assign you the side. I want you to argue in favor of the notion that, like, because you mentioned before around cycles, right? You mentioned how like we're becoming more like maybe progressive or liberal in terms of this stuff.
Yeah.
I want you to give me the argument that we've got to turn the tide and this stuff's actually bad for us and we should become more repressed, or we should turn the corner back to being more conservative and less open about this stuff.
Well, I mean, I think that my childhood has prepared me well as someone who grew up in the church and broke away later on. But look, there's a very, very strong argument, both from a moral perspective and a practical perspective for what you're talking about. So it's quite an easy conversation to have. I think that the positives of swinging back to more conservative values largely go to this idea around sex before marriage and before you're in a mental space, both parties are in a mental space to actually have a lasting commitment to each other. I think most people think now that there are zero consequences for sex. And I think that in most cases is not true. And of course, that's where babies come from. But apart from that too, there's also like emotional and psychological impacts as well. So while I wouldn't ever advocate to preaching or to actually going back to a world that was like very puritanic, there are obvious benefits to society, to the raising of kids, to the psychological damage that happens, to the exploitation of men and women, to the manipulation of men and women. I think that that is quite clear to me. Now, I'm a firm believer that you have to let people express themselves and have their choice. But I do believe that if you can do that with the right mindset of a long-term commitment, that is always going to be more functional for the vast, vast majority of people. So really, you're talking about less psychological damage, less risk of family breakups and things like that. And just happier, healthy families and societies. So that's a pretty strong case to me.
This is probably like more an argument about like, is there a risk of overshooting, right? Because I think all of the institutions that have repressed people like over centuries or whatever, whether it's the Catholic Church or other religious kind of notions of piety or whatever, that they've been very strict, and like not just that they've been strict, but they've also been quite like they've been written by men, not necessarily to the advantage of women. So I think the kind of movement of a book like this, and not just, this is just one of in a tradition, but like the general notion of like, hey, women actually also physiologically geared to have pleasure, God forbid, right? That's a step in the right direction.
They medically didn't even admit the female orgasm was real until like some shockingly late time.
But at the same time, can you overshoot? Like, because virtually every culture in, human history has like had some kind of governance over, sexual
You're so true, Andy.
relations,
I mean,
right?
Rome was pretty orgy heavy at the end. So
maybe any consequences of this are not material, and they're not even, you don't even blink at them. But I think a world where you kind of just ignore that there could be consequences of not even sort of acknowledging that maybe this stuff will get abused. Like, there's just all of these different dimensions that take time to flow through, and we're not there yet.
Agree, but I do think it's swinging back. I think we will see a little bit of return, a contraction in those progressive sexual values, and all of its own challenges.
Well, now we've got Marco Rubio in the.
What I want to talk about actually is a man's response to this. So my question would be: I believe generally that men feel uncomfortable. And this is a generalization. I'm willing to discuss it. Men feel uncomfortable when women have a different sexual appetite, or a sexual appetite and adventureness, whatever it is, an attitude towards sex that is above that of the men, right? They feel threatened by it. They feel uncomfortable by it. And I think this book takes it into that territory. I want you to kind of prosecute that line of argument for me.
I think it is less about like a notion of women having more than men. I think it's just generally a lot of that stuff, that we listen to today is quite confronting. And I think there would be as many women as there are men who would get the same kind of uncomfortable vibes, right? Listening to that. And I'm thinking of, do you know who I'm thinking of? I'm thinking of like a 75, 85-year-old grandma who attends a Catholic church, like how she would react listening to this stuff, right? And she would be squirming in her seat. Like, this stuff is pretty full on, and it's our culture and our society that trains us to be receptive to that.
There are some very old, like in terms of the voice actors, there are some old ones that are included in the book as well.
This stuff is like, you keep it to yourself, you lock it away. It's a discussion for you behind closed doors with the most intimate person that you're...
Well, obviously not even, because none of them have shared them with their partners.
Okay, if you've got a really extreme story like those, then yes, don't share them with with your partners. But like, but like this... Okay, if this were, maybe to put it another way, if this were literally a book club book, this wouldn't work, because too many people would just not be comfortable with it, right? And I don't think that's a male-female thing. I think almost tautologically in your proposition, right, if men feel uncomfortable, if women are kind of more pushing the envelope further than them, then you're almost implying that men are being forced to engage in something that they're not comfortable with. Maybe there's some sexist attitudes out there, but like, I think like it's the effect of religion is like has permeated through to culture, and not just religion per se, but all of the cultural values that are associated with that. Like if you grew up in a Catholic background, you're going to inherit, like, even if you're an atheist, you're still going to inherit the sense of discomfort at this stuff.
I mean, Catholic guilt plus this book.
Yeah.
How many Hail Marys is this book?
Yeah. I don't want to hear what Mary had to say.
She's chapter 4.
I think this is maybe the sharper edge of the point, is that if you're a conservative man, you don't want your wife or your partner like talking about this stuff at the dinner table, right? With other people, especially.
I think it's the shame aspect as well. Like, you don't, like, there is a whole thing, we want a lady in the street, but a freak in the bed. Like, I think that is not quite true. Like, you don't want, when they say freak in the bed, they don't mean this. But look, this is all just generalizations, right? I guess the real question for me out of all of this is that if your partner actually had these fantasies, would you want to know about it?
It's sort of like Schrodinger's cat, isn't it? Right? Like if someone's watching, then it only exists because people can't see it, right? There's always going to be a more extreme version of the fantasy in the comfort of the inner mind. And I think that's the crucial point with this stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know, actually. And I think this is part of what these kind of books should do. They should spark a discussion on, are people repressing these things? It also blurs the line a lot for me around consent and this idea of like a fantasy is not consent. A fantasy gets its utility from being an improbability and impossibility in real life. It shows how complex we are. It shows how complex the psyche is, that we can want things that are bad for us. We can create these really vivid fantasies inside our head that, crave things that are dysfunctional or bad for us, but excite us. And I think that it's the good part of this book is it just shows where that complexity is, right? And I think that is a good thing. And the reduction of shame, I think, is a good thing. Because if you're someone, a lot of this episode is us trying to grapple with the fact that this could actually be real. But I think if you take it in good faith and on face value that all of these things are real, like these authors and these people, and hopefully they're women, but whatever, actually feel this and they are their fantasies that they have crafted in their head, then you have to kind of say that having intense shame about them can't be a good thing.
No, I agree with that. Talking about intense shame, I also got the audiobook version of this.
Even after I warned you.
If we're going to do an episode, I should at least...
You got the paperback and the audiobook now.
No, I don't have the paperback. I took a photo of the paperback back in a shop. But I was thinking like with the audiobook version, right? Well, the first thought I had is that as I'm listening to the audiobook in the car, as I like go through McDonald's drive-through, I best turn the volume down. And the second thought I had was actually, I was like in the lift at work and I was thinking, actually, this is not like the book that you want showing on your phone, like for everyone to see that you're listening to.
If your Bluetooth headphones disconnect and it starts playing it through your speaker or something. I just to round things out, I had a very funny story too, where I was, I've, to be honest with you, I've really struggled to listen to this book, and I definitely haven't listened to all of it, just because it's quite mentally draining. Like hearing people's most intimate, deepest, darkest fantasies is quite draining. And it all kind of repeats after a while. But I had it on the car in like Apple CarPlay, and then I've also bought the audio book of the Quran, and so like immediately after a story, I don't know what happened, but I must have bumped the controller and it like started playing the Quran after this, and I'm like, oh, this is like the universe telling me to cleanse my soul after listening. After listening to all these fantasies.
I'm glad to hear that your soul is saved.